Welcome to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I'm your host, James Pogashnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And at the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, most notably from the Wide Left Substack. He is Mr. Useful Human, Arif Hassan. Arif, it's the middle of July. It's time for a podcast. Do you know what you want to talk about?
Dude, this sounds like an ad read, man. Are we talking about Manscaped?
No, actually, we're not going to do Manscaped. We're not going to do BetterHelp. What else is popular? Chumba. We're not going to do that.
There's the calendar that emailed everyone a month ago.
Oh, there's that. We're not going to do the ad for every once in a while we get emails in for like products that we should advertise, and they'll give us a free one. And a lot of times they're just really awful bobbleheads. We're not going to do those.
There's tons of that. I'm shocked that still happens.
Sometimes the emails are just like the copy and pasting of the name is my favorite part, because sometimes they just like cut off. So it'll be like Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your minute. Like it reached the character limit. It reached
its character limit. Yeah,
it's fantastic. As the person who has to read through every single one of those emails, appreciated. Welcome to this episode of Norse Code. It's the beginning of July. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we're gonna do things a little differently than we've done in the past. In the past, in July, we don't know exactly what we're going to talk about. Let's just hide for a couple of weeks. Nonsense. We are out here in the front lines, podcasting for our very lives, or something.
For our very lives.
Livelihood.
We're in the trenches.
We're in the trenches right now. And we opened it up to the listeners and said, hey, what would you guys like us to talk about? Is there something you would like us to discuss long form that we haven't done in a while? So we've got that. It's basically I'd say a choose your own adventure thing, but I don't even know if that's accurate. It's kind of more akin to an all mailbag episode, but we'll be going over a couple of things that we've just, I wouldn't say neglected, just haven't done real long form stuff on. So if we're going to talk a bit about the salary cap and some stuff about rookie QBs and teams, we're also going to discuss the state of the NFC North. And what's happened as far as signings, draft picks, and all that. In case you've missed it, there's been a lot of work this year by the Chicago Bears to be decent. We will see if that actually pans out. This is usually the team that wins the offseason, and then you bet the under. But and then, of course, we have the mailbag as well. But before we start, again, thank you guys so much for listening to Norse Code. If you enjoy the show and would like access to things like the Discord or bonus episodes, you can go over to patreon.com/NorseCode for $3.50 a month, or a little less for the year subscription. You get access to all of that. A new episode will be posted here in the next couple of days. You can also go to paypal.me/NorseCode as well for a one-time donation, or you can go to norsecode.threadless.com for any number of wonderful pieces of Norse Code merchandise. The hoodies are awesome now. The hats look surprisingly good. I kind of want to send you a hat, but you don't seem like a real hat person.
I'm not a huge hat guy, though.
No, but they are pretty sweet. The hats go harder than you'd expect. So check it out. T-shirts, baby onesies, all of that. norsecode.threadless.com. All right, so we're going to get into the show. And one of the first things that I was thinking about when we were talking about what we should be recording about this particular episode, we've had a number of questions over the years about where do you start learning about like how the cap works, and how how it's kind of calculated, but B, how can certain teams go so long with like abusing the cap basically and not really having to deal with the consequences of it. In the case of the New Orleans Saints, doing that for like a decade and a half, and then finally having the rent due this year. But we wanted to start with a discussion on how the cap works, and it turns out that most of the work was done for us.
Yeah, so Brett Coleman just posted a video on this very question. I mean, we talked about all of the elements that he brings up in that video in like various episodes in response to like a specific question or something like that. But he kind of put it all together into one video. And because it's Brett Coleman with like a high production value and like charts and graphs, and it's good. It's a very good video. So I'll send you over there, but like, the fundamental like thesis is essentially that the salary cap is basically just another accounting mechanism. So every dollar that a team pays out gets accounted for at some point in the process, but it doesn't have to be accounted for in the same year that the money actually left the team's bank account. And so there's like various mechanisms to kind of make it a little bit more fair. So the original idea is that like, hey, if you sign a player and that player signs a signing bonus, you'll end up paying that player that year maybe $90 million, right? So you'll pay their like base salary that year, which maybe that's like $10 million. And then you'll also pay an $80 million signing bonus. And it's not really appropriate. It doesn't really make a lot of sense to pay to account against the cap that $80 million from the signing bonus. And so the idea is you spread that out over time, over the life of the contract. But, you know, there are teams that would find a way to kind of abuse that and have like funny money at the end of contracts. And so there's a limit. You can only do that for a maximum of 5 years or the lifetime of the contract, whichever comes first. And so that accounting has forever changed the way that the cap works. And so you have the ability to implement some kind of bonus that will be spread out over 5 years, but which years count can be kind of funny. So a good example of this would be like Kirk Cousins' last contract with the Vikings had 2 void years added onto it. So a void year is essentially when you add a year to a contract. So you say, hey, your contract runs from, say, 2023 to 2027. But there's a funny little provision. It's just one line in the contract, a unique quirk of the contract, that the contract automatically cancels in 2025. And so really, it's a 2-year contract with 3 additional years that are outlined in the contract that will not count, that will automatically void, which seems strange, and it is strange, actually. That's correct. But what it allows you to do is to take that signing bonus and spread it out over the 5 years of that contract. And then when the void year hits and you automatically cut the player, that money that would be accounted for in 2025, 2026, and 2027 now all gets accounted for in 2025 because that player is cut. Any money that was meant to be distributed over the life of this contract now must be accounted for in the year subsequent to the year that you cut this player. So that's the essential bare bones of it. There's a lot of other elements to it. If you take a look at something like Mahomes' contract, which is a 10-year contract, you'll find that there isn't that much money guaranteed for Mahomes in it, which you think, hey, that's kind of odd. That's, the consensus number 1 quarterback in the NFL. If we ignore the last year or 2 of play, I mean, he wasn't like bad, but like the best, no, not really. That's odd that he wouldn't get it completely guaranteed. Wouldn't he want the security of completely guaranteed money? And the thing is, he has that security without that money being fully guaranteed. And so what ends up happening is that, and this is a hypothetical. I'm not actually looking at his contract right now, but let's say in 2026, so on March 15th, 2026, or whenever the league year starts, sometime in March 15th, 2026, his 2027 salary will become fully guaranteed. So because you're not going to cut him in 2026, because if you do, you end up having to pay out like the money that's been guaranteed up until this point, including the 2025 salary. He's functionally guaranteed that 2026 salary. There's not really a way to get out of that. And the reason that you would do that is because in order to guarantee a player's salary, there's something called the funding rule. And the funding rule stipulates that any money that is guaranteed in the salary at the moment of signing has to go into an escrow account that the team essentially, and I say essentially for a reason, essentially can't touch. They can't take money out of that account to play another player. That money goes into a separate account, paid out to the player according to the schedule designated by the team. The kind of funny thing about that is, one, it limits the number of guarantees a team can put together, which is why, because not every team is equally, we call it like liquid with access to cash. So the example that we always use in this podcast, and the two teams that are maybe best positioned for this example, are the Cincinnati Bengals and the Las Vegas Raiders, which if you take a look at the amount of guaranteed money they've given out over the years, it's significantly less than their peer organizations. I wouldn't say they're the bottom two, but they're the ones that everyone kind of knows about as a quote unquote cash poor team, as legacy teams that aren't like teams that were bought by billionaires, but teams that were started early in the NFL's life cycle. And so the team is the primary income generator for the ownership, as opposed to like the New England Patriots, where like Robert Kraft's paper company is the primary method with which he makes money, or the Washington Commanders, where with Josh Harris, he owns a private equity firm. And so that's how he makes money. The Browns, who own the Bengals, but not like the team Brown, but like the family with the last name Brown. And the Davises, who own the Raiders, or rather just Mark Davis, their primary income stream is with those teams. And so they don't have access to a lot of liquid cash, and they can't put that money in escrow. So they use things like rolling guarantees. The Chiefs are kind of in that situation. They're not as liquid as the teams that are owned by billionaires, like the Broncos, right? And so they have to orchestrate a system that doesn't force them to put money into escrow, which the NFL is actually, they are attempting to get rid of the funding rule, and the NFLPA doesn't want them to. And I think that's a little bit short-sighted. I understand kind of why you would want that, but I think it's a little bit outdated. And it relates to a piece that I wrote, which we'll talk about in a little bit, about guarantees. But it was designed to prevent a lot of the problems that occurred early on in the NFL's life. Like, so I wrote a piece about like the original owner of the New York Jets last year when they played the Jets in London. And that guy did not have a ton of liquid money. And so like players would turn in their paychecks and the checks would default. And so there was just not enough money in the Jets bank account to pay the players. And so that's why you would do that, is to prevent that situation. Now, that's not really a concern anymore, but they do want to prevent that from happening. So that's why you get a lot of the structures that you get with rolling guarantees, with bonuses and stuff like that, because every dollar that a team pays out is accounted for in the cap, but it's just not accounted for necessarily in the year that the dollar is paid out. And so the mechanisms that exist with cap accounting are such that over time, those dollars will be accounted for. And what's really interesting is if you take a look at the salary caps that have existed over the past 5 years and the amount of cash that's been paid out over the past 5 years, the NFL's cash over cap is what it's called, has always exceeded 100%, which means they have paid out more in cash every single year over the last 5 years than they technically have cap space for. And that's because the dollar that you pay now may not be accounted for until 3, 4, 5 years down the road. So if you want more specifics into how that works, if you're a visual learner, we'll link the Brett Coleman video in the show notes, or you can just go to his YouTube channel. It's the most recent video as of this recording, which is How Accountants Broke the NFL. Check that out. That'll give you kind of a visual representation, or maybe, this explanation didn't click with you for some reason. He'll be using different words. Maybe those words will click with you. So check that out. That'll give you a little bit more of an understanding of like the way that the salary cap works.
Reef, don't worry. You have fine words. What are you talking about?
I have the worst words, the least beautiful words.
the least beautiful words. Just as a side note on this, there was I would almost call it a fad, but there was a trend fairly recently of players attempting to negotiate their own deals as opposed to doing them through agents. And sometimes there was a bit of a gamble put on themselves, and sometimes it worked out for Richard Sherman, and sometimes it didn't work out, like for Richard Sherman. Is there a big difference between how those deals are kind of negotiated, or what kind of compensation you end up getting when you end up representing yourself?
I would like to actually look into that in a little bit more detail about any trends that occur in player negotiated deals. But the things that concern me about player negotiated deals are the way that the guarantee structure works, how the percentage of their money becomes guaranteed, what assurances that they're given, what bonuses are included, the difference between likely to be earned and unlikely to be earned bonuses. So Richard Sherman's a good example. Lamar Jackson is a pretty good example, which if you take a look at Lamar Jackson's contract, like I wrote a whole piece again about Lamar Jackson and the contract negotiations. He ended up doing a really good job for himself, despite the fact that no teams seemingly wanted to negotiate with him. Who am I thinking of? Oh, Russell Okung is another good example. Where there's all kinds of like potential pitfalls where a team has like dozens of years of experience, like multiple decades of experience when you put it all together, negotiating contracts. Your agent and the agency that your agent comes from has dozens of years of experience negotiating contracts. And you negotiate contracts 2 or 3 times, like in your life, ideally, right? And so there's going to be all kinds of pitfalls that I'm not aware of, that the player may not be aware of, no matter how much they study, right? That they might not be like fully cognizant might hurt them, like the way an incentive structure works, the way a pay schedule works, what bonuses matter, what bonuses may not matter, how much guaranteed money matters and stuff like that, what contract triggers to watch out for. And I'm not saying agents are perfect, right? Like I think the Kyler Murray deal is a good example of like an agent really screwing things up by allowing a team to put in the video game clause or whatever it was, you know?
Loved that. Loved it.
Yeah. But yeah, so like the way that a guarantee schedule works out or a pay schedule works out or whatever, that's something to keep in mind. Now, some players, like I think DeAndre Hopkins, for example, he negotiated his own contract, but he did, before he signed the contract, send it off to some people to give him some advice. And that's just like having a lawyer look over a contract, right? Like that probably, works. So, I think that there's like ways to do it where you're not really screwing yourself. But I think that having someone look over a contract after you've negotiated it is not really the same as being a participant in the negotiating process with the level of history and expertise that somebody who negotiates contracts for a living will have. And so you don't know like a way to kind of buy back some of the problems that you might see in a contract. So if, for example, you negotiate a contract with a team, you're really satisfied with the terms, you take it to your friend who does read contracts for a living, and you see in there that there's an unusual clause that voids guaranteed money for, let's say, failing a drug test. Well, that might seem, and that's just a hypothetical example, I don't know if this has happened, but like that might seem like a clause that's fairly typical for an NFL contract. Actually, now that I think about it, I think this is like one of the things that was holding up the Roquan Smith contract with the Bears when he was drafted by the Bears. So my brain might have just pulled at that memory. But that might seem like it's normal. And so you kind of just gloss over it. Well, your friend might have caught it. And I'm glad that you had that friend look over that contract for you. But if the team, for example, knew that you had an agent, they might never have put that in there. Or now you have, or the team puts it in there, and then you incensed, now have a little bit of leverage to negotiate that out, and you can ask for a little bit more, or anything along those lines. Now you just have to go back to the team and just say, hey, you have to strike that. And it's not really a negotiation more than it is a, hey, you just tried to screw me here. So, I think that is an element to pay attention to, but that is something kind of like worth taking a look at, because like Laramie Tunsil negotiated his own deal. I think Larry Fitzgerald did, which, by the way, his son is like just committed to Notre Dame. Jesus. Bobby Wagner, Richard Sherman, Russell Okung, DeAndre Hopkins. That's going to be kind of interesting. I know that Russell Okung wanted his deal paid out in Bitcoin, and everyone was like, wow, that's so interesting. And it's like, it's not really that interesting, because all that happened was that the team would take his game check and then convert it into Bitcoin and then send it to his Bitcoin wallet, which is not any different than if he had received the game check and just converted it to Bitcoin himself, except now somebody has to pay the gas fee, which, if you're not familiar with cryptocurrency, just don't worry about it. It doesn't matter. It's just an additional fee for every single transaction that you make on the network. Very good currency. So that's essentially not real. You could just do that yourself. It doesn't matter. But yeah, like there's all kinds of like clauses or elements that can be added into a contract that could make it less player friendly. And that might be different for every team or every negotiating posture. So there may not even be a specific pattern, but it's something I'd watch out for, just because it's like, it's not that I think like a player necessarily isn't equipped to have the kind of acumen that you'd need to negotiate a contract. It's just that the experience of contracts is like really significantly important, in the same way that like two equally athletic people aren't going to be equally as good at football if one of them has played football their whole life and the other one has watched a bunch of people play football and has picked up a football maybe like 3 or 4 times in their life. Like, yeah, you're equally athletic, but that doesn't mean you're both going to be good at football, right? So it's kind of like that for me, where it's like, well, I'm going to take the guy that, I mean, he might not even be as smart as the player, but he's got this like history of negotiating contracts where it can be kind of rote and automatic, and you don't have to worry about a bunch of this stuff. Players avoid that sometimes because, like in DeAndre Hopkins' case, he wanted to do it because he wants to be a GM someday. And so he thought that that'd be valuable experience. Some players do it because they want an unusual contract provision, like Russell Okung. Some players do it to avoid I think it's like 2.5% agent brokerage fee, which like I think you get more than 2.5% in return for having someone handle that business for you. So for me personally, I wouldn't do that in this hypothetical world where I have an agent negotiate my NFL contract. But yeah, I mean, I think the primary motivation is to avoid the agent fee, but there's a bunch of other motivations that are kind of worth paying attention to as well.
So the Vikings have J.J. McCarthy and is likely the starter this year. And as a result, we did get a question on something that I thought was kind of interesting, and that's the ways that teams have failed rookie quarterbacks in the past, and if that trend is continuing.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, the really difficult thing about this question is we don't actually know what the rate is for how often teams fail their quarterbacks. And by that, I mean, like, we know what the percentage of busts are and stuff like that. That's not really what I mean. But we don't know what percentage of those quarterbacks, had they gone into a different environment, would have succeeded, right? And so we don't have like a counterfactual where we can kind of experiment with what would have happened. So we don't know what like the base rate is that we're comparing everything to, right? So we don't know that any teams are failing these quarterbacks, right? Every team could be operating optimally, and maybe the bust rate and the success rate would be the same. But I think that when we take a look at the quarterbacks that have succeeded or the quarterbacks that have failed, we could take a look at like how teams have approached making sure that they can resolve some of the problems or minimize the existence of those problems. Like Bo Nix is a pretty good example of a quarterback where they kind of isolated the things that he's good at, the things that he's not so good at, and have made sure to emphasize an offense that prioritizes the things that he's good at, right? So that is kind of at the big level, the things that you're looking at. I think for a team to kind of understand how to develop a quarterback, they need to be very specific and very detailed in the way that they're diagnosing the problems that they see in the quarterback and ways to fix those problems. So a really good example of this might be something like footwork, right? Where when you take a look at a quarterback who is, let's say, missing throws when he's throwing outside the numbers or something like that, you can say, maybe the issue there is timing. Maybe the issue there is that his arm is just not that accurate. Maybe it's this issue or that one. But if you're more specific, you might be able to say, well, the footwork is the issue. Okay, well, that's a little bit more specific, but that doesn't give us kind of a path to figure out how to resolve the problem here and whether or not this problem is resolvable in a single offseason. So you could get more specific and say, well, the issue with this quarterback's footwork in this particular case is that, this is a hypothetical quarterback. I don't know if we're talking about an actual one who had this problem, is that when he opens up his hips to throw, he tends to take his lead foot and bounce it outside of his throw, which is why that occurs on throws outside the numbers, but it doesn't occur on throws over the intermediate, no matter how deep it is, right? So we found a problem that would explain, this issue. It would explain why this issue only appears in the instances it does and not really any other instances. And we can identify based off of the film when it's happening, when it's not happening, and how it impacts the throw. Okay, he's more inaccurate outside the numbers than we expect. One possible cause is that his lead foot is stepping outside when he's opening up his hips in the process of the throw. Let's take a look at the film. Yep, that's what's happening. Okay, so how do we fix that, right? And there's a lot of ways to fix it, right? One of the ways can be just to do endless footwork drills, and maybe that is the smartest way to fix it. One way could be to slow down this quarterback's process so that they're more intentional about the way that they engage in their footwork, and maybe that means the offense has to adjust a little bit to a slower processing quarterback, and what that would mean is that your routes are running a little bit deeper, or something along those lines, until this quarterback kind of nails what they need to nail in terms of their footwork a little bit more gradually. Kind of depends on what point of the season you've identified this issue, right? So there are a lot of potential approaches here. But some of these problems probably aren't fixable, right? We've talked in the past about, an issue like arm strength, right? So arm strength is something that we tend to think of is not really fixable or improvable. And that's historically broadly true, but there are a lot of specific examples where that hasn't been the case. I think one interesting example that we don't really talk that much about is Aaron Rodgers, who at the peak of his career was considered to have one of the strongest arms in the NFL, maybe the strongest, right? At least in contention for this argument. That wasn't his scouting report coming out of Cal. It wasn't that he had a weak arm. I'm not saying that he went from a weak arm to a really, really strong arm, but then I don't think anybody would have characterized his arm as anything above, better than a little bit above average. And interestingly, in the same draft, Alex Smith was known to have an extraordinarily strong arm, which I think that's actually true, and we tend to conflate arm strength with the ability to throw deep passes or the desire to throw deep passes. Not really the same thing, not really the point here. But one element for how Aaron Rodgers' arm strength, quote unquote, arm strength improved, or rather how much velocity he was able to put on his passes, is that he changed his mechanics. He came from the Tedford School of Quarterbacking. They very famously have what's called a robotic mechanical style. And the carriage, the ball would be held up like next to his ear. And, that didn't allow very much movement of his arm, and so he wasn't able to generate a ton of velocity. Well, that changed with the change in his mechanics. Okay, so we were able to change this guy's arm strength by taking a look at his mechanics and resetting, where he carried the ball and when he would wind up and stuff like that. But somebody like Drew Brees had pretty good throwing mechanics the whole time. How was he able to improve arm strength? From what we know, the gym. that was kind of it, and so and sometimes that's time spent in the gym on your arms. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes you improve arm strength by improving your leg strength, because it's a kinetic chain from the ground to your arm. So you have to identify the problem and then look at opportunities to fix the problem. With Drew Brees, you didn't have the ability to improve the mechanics anymore to a point where you'd see a lot more velocity. Whereas with Aaron Rodgers, you could. If it was possible to improve Drew Brees' arm strength, maybe it was in the gym, but then you're taking time away from something else, right? Time is a finite resource. You have to budget it accordingly. There are some things that are maybe even more difficult to fix. So one thing that I've learned in covering like the S2 cognition stuff, which has turned like all the way on the other side of the pendulum, that like now people are talking about it as if it's like a fake, a fraudulent, it's nothing. 16 teams still have contracts with them. One thing I've learned is that your visual processing speed is not really going to change a lot by the time you enter, your professional working environment, whatever it is. And that includes the NFL. So if you can't see stuff as quickly, are there ways for you to anticipate what you need to do based off of how quickly you're seeing things? And there might not be, I don't know, right? But there might be, in a decent example of how you might do this. And I don't know that Jaden Daniels has slow processing or anything like that. So I'm using this example without suggesting that Jaden Daniels necessarily has some issue with visual processing speed. I don't know. But one way that you might be able to do it is to do what the Commanders did with Jaden Daniels, which is to put him in a virtual reality environment. And I tend to think that these things are probably not as effective as people think, but maybe for specific problems with specific solutions, this could be part of a broader set of tools to maybe resolve some things. And so what they did in his learning environment is put him into as close to a realistic VR environment as they could and sped up the game. So one of the problems translating from college to the NFL is that a lot of the college players that they're playing against are simply slower, both in terms of their reaction time, visual processing speed, and also physically the speed that they carry, right? So you've got a lot of defensive backs who in college are running a 4.6 and are a reasonably fast college player. But in the NFL, you're just not going to, it's like Josh Norman and that's it. Like you're not going to find 4.6 defensive backs. I guess Kyle Hamilton technically, but I don't think anyone believes that's his real speed. So with that in mind, you know that their ability to throw a receiver open is going to be a little bit different, and they need to anticipate that throwing window is going to be open, right? And if they are not throwing with anticipation, if they're waiting for a guy to get open, it might just be that they're not seeing stuff as quickly. That might not be the problem. The problem might be that they don't trust themselves. They don't trust what they're seeing. They've got a slow trigger in terms of how confident they are in making the throw. Those are two different problems, right? And maybe VR can solve the second one more than the first one. But to stay on the first example, what it can be is you have to throw with even more anticipation than you typically thought you would, because you don't know if someone's open until you see that open window. And that might be just an issue of your visual processing speed and how quickly you're interpreting the data in front of you. So if you're in a sped up environment, it could be that you're interpreting the patterns of the data well before you typically would train a quarterback to do it. One of the other advantages here is that it is a film room that's just not top down, right? Like when you take a look at film, like, if you've got an NFL Pro subscription, which like, if you're into film, I highly recommend that. That's like a crazy good deal. The NFL media arm did something right. I love that, and I very rarely praise them. But if you have an NFL Pro subscription or something like that, you see the all 22, so you see the offensive line, defensive line view, which is the end zone view, and then you see the actual all 22, which is top down, and that's really useful. It helps you diagnose like cover 2, cover 4, whatever, until you know what's happening. But you kind of have to match your memory with that play to have a good understanding of what cover 4 might look like from inside the pocket, because it's going to look different. Like you can always map it, but different people have different spatial visual processing in the brain. And this is not about cognition necessarily. It's about kind of your ability to produce images in your brain, which is different for everybody, right? And so if you can't map those two together, maybe VR also has the ability to do something along those lines and allows you to make those decisions quicker. It doesn't improve your visual processing capability. It just kind of moves the decision point for when you need to begin your throw to earlier in the process. So I think where a lot of teams might potentially fail some of these quarterbacks, if, it's fair to argue that, these teams could have put themselves in a better position to develop these quarterbacks, might just be that they're not doing a very good job of diagnosing the specific issue, because you can't just call a player inaccurate and have that be a useful guiding light for you on how to improve that player. Be very specific about what's causing their problems, and then have a plan, a training regimen in place for how to resolve those problems. And sometimes it might just be playing games and just being bad for a while, right? Like, I don't know that, this virtual reality stuff is going to really track for a lot of players. We don't even know if it tracked for Jaden Daniels, if we're being honest. That's just a nice story that we have. But we don't know if that's going to track for some players. So, and maybe you just need to literally play the game. And while the VR thing is nice because you can play the plays at 1.25 speed or whatever it was that Daniels was doing, it might not be something that you'll get stuff out of because you have to embody what you need to do. You need to physically see and, whatever, right? And so it might just be that you have to play games. But I think a lot of teams, from my guess, right, I think a lot of teams just assume that playing the games will resolve the problem because you just need that experience. The experience is going to be super helpful, for sure. But it might also put you in a position where you're ingraining the bad habits along with trying to develop new good habits, which is, people who've listened to the show for a long time know that my best example of this is like TJ Clemmings, who I think could have actually developed into a pretty good offensive lineman if he wasn't forced to start his rookie year. And he ingrained a lot of really bad habits into the muscle memory of how he plays football. And I think the same thing can happen at any position, including quarterback.
So the other thing that people have requested that Arif discuss at great length is the Minnesota Lynx, who I believe are doing fantastic this season. You have long championed the Minnesota Lynx, and mainly due to how much money you were able to make on betting on them. How are the Lynx doing this year?
The Lynx are outstanding this year. They're crazy good. They're undefeated at home. And they've got the best record in the league. They've got the best plus minus for their starters and the best plus minus for their bench. They do well at any pace. They're so good. I struggle to describe how. So they've got a record of 85, 86%. I think they're playing as we record this. So no, they're not. They just beat the Sparks, which, like, good. It's not a very good team. They've got a record about 86%, 85.7, and the next best team in the standings, the Phoenix Mercury of all teams, which I didn't expect, are 700. This is like a huge difference. They're 3.5 games back from the Lynx, 18-3 to 14-6. The New York Liberty are 13-6. And the fact that they've got both the best bench and the best starters by any, per possession, plus 100, whatever metric that you want to use, is mind-boggling. Mind you, the Commissioner's Cup game that they lost to the Fever doesn't count in these standings. It's not part of it, but still, they're incredible. Nafisa Collier's playing at an MVP level again. Kayla McBride should have made the All-Star game. Cheryl Reeve made a pretty good point about how it's kind of weird that the obviously best team in the league only has 2 All-Stars. But yeah, that's something else. Yeah, I don't know, man. This good team that doesn't need its draft picks to do well, I guess, for it to be an outstanding organization.
So we wanted to talk about kind of around the league stuff and focus on the NFC North because there's been a lot of changes in the NFC North. Chicago apparently has won the off season again, so good for them. That'll be a nice trophy for them. We want to talk about kind of like the state of the NFC North before training camp and kind of what to expect and comings and goings of the individual teams. Let's start with Chicago because they seem to have made the most noise. And will it actually turn into something? Or, as I mentioned earlier, should you just bet the under on that?
Yeah, I think most of the time when the Bears make waves in the offseason, when they win the offseason Lombardi, it's usually through like player acquisitions, like when they signed like TJ Edwards or whoever, like both linebackers that they signed that year, or when they trade for DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, or whatever, right? Like it's always like players that they've acquired. They got the top picks, they got to draft Caleb Williams. This time, it's primarily a product of the coaching changes. Now, they did add a couple players. We'll talk about that. But it's primarily a product of the coaching changes. They got rid of Eberflus and almost all of that staff. I think they maybe retained like a couple, like the special teams coordinator they retained, the tight end coach they retained. But for the most part, they've got Ben Johnson as their head coach, and I believe he's going to be their offensive play caller, which is a good thing because their offensive coordinator is Press Taylor, a guy that if you ever bring him up around a Jaguars fan, is probably going to, be harmful to your health, right? Like you should not really discuss Press Taylor all that often around Jaguars fans. Terrible play caller from what we can tell. And took a couple of people from the Lions with him, right? So JT Barrett, of all people, is their quarterbacks coach. He was previously the assistant quarterbacks coach for the Lions. Antoine Randall again, sure, right? Is the wide receivers coach and also the assistant head coach. He grabbed him from the Lions where he was the wide receivers coach. And yeah, that seems to be kind of the approach here. I think offensively, the Bears are going to be really interesting because Ben Johnson has made his name as a good offensive coordinator for being able to turn around Jared Goff's career in much the same way that Sean McVay did, right? And a lot of it is kind of the adaptability that Ben Johnson had. He was able to craft a very McVay-ish offense despite never having been on McVay's staff in concert with Jared Goff. And so the expectation is he'll do kind of the same thing, maybe not necessarily a McVay-ish offense, but craft an offense around Caleb Williams in concert with Caleb Williams to produce that. The defensive coordinator is Dennis Allen, recently fired head coach of the New Orleans Saints. He's a very good defensive coordinator, so kind of curious about that. Grabbed Eric Bieniemy from UCLA as the running backs coach. That's kind of a name that people are now familiar with again. But yeah, it's a almost entirely refreshed coaching staff. Some of the stuff that that they did not moving the needle for me, like Press Taylor, but for the most part, really good coaching staff, right? So we'll see kind of if they've got the ability to work with that. They made a lot of player changes, though, in addition to that coaching staff change. And I think the most notable might be grabbing Joe Thuney from the Chiefs. I think that's probably kind of the biggest change that everyone's excited about in Bears country. They added a lot of interior offensive linemen. So they added Joe Thuney. They grabbed Jonah Jackson from the Rams, who was previously with the Lions. They also grabbed Drew Dahlman from the Falcons, which I think is probably, if you're going to find like another premier player that they grabbed, that's probably the guy. Making more money than Drew Dahlman, but probably not nearly as good of a player, Dayo Odeyingbo, an edge rusher from, or maybe he's going to be an interior defensive, but I think he's an edge rusher from the Indianapolis Colts. They grabbed Grady Jarrett from the Falcons, who has a very recognizable name. I don't think he's got his fastball anymore. Then they grabbed like a couple of depth guys, right? So they added Jordan McFadden, they added Olamide Zaccheaus, they added Devin Duvernay, who might do some, returning for them. But those are the guys that they added. That's a very, impressive group. That's part of the reason they won the offseason again. And it kind of resolves a lot of the weaknesses that they've had along the interior over the past couple of years. But I don't know that they're going to be in a spot where they're able to take advantage of everything. I think that the receiver group is still pretty old. I don't think DJ Moore is going to be enough for them to do everything that they need to do. I know that they've got Rome Odunze, and he's going to have to basically hold down the fort while they got all these olds around him. They added Luther Burden, who I don't know is going to be ready right away because at Mizzou he was probably not used correctly, and so having like this raw offensive weapon is maybe going to take some time. But I think that the idea that along with Darnell Wright, who they expect to keep on progressing, and Braxton Jones, they've revamped their offensive line. They've got a better receiving room than they had 2 years ago. That they're going to be offensively explosive, right? Adding Colston Loveland at tight end, sure. I think a lot of people really hated that, and I get it because you had a tight end that everyone liked more on the board. But I think just from purely looking at the amount of talent that they gained, you can say that maybe you could have done a little bit better in terms of how you allocated your resources, but this is still adding talent at a position that you've tried to add talent to for years and couldn't do. I find kind of the whole draft really kind of curious because if you take a look at it against the consensus board, they only really added one player that meaningfully added value versus the pick investment that they put in. So Colston Loveland was negative value. Ozzie Trapillo from Boston College, negative value. Shamar Turner from Texas A&M, negative value. Ruben Hippolyte, super athletic linebacker from Maryland, super negative value, actually. The consensus board regards him as the 401st overall player, which means he added 0 points of value. Luke Newman from Michigan State, also 0 value, very negative value pick, given the pick investment of the 195th overall pick. Technically, Zoff Frazier, cornerback, is additional value, but that was kind of more of a wash. So really, the only player that they added that was positive value was Luther Burden. We'll see, right? Because it's while the consensus board grades, which are based off of like return on investment, do correlate to team performance 2-3 years down the road, which is like a fun, interesting finding. One of the elements involved there, the reason that you use return on investment is because you're pricing in the fact that this team was already bad, right? That's why they had so much capital going in. And so you take that out so you can look at improvement over time. From the individual team's perspective, though, what matters is not necessarily what the implication of having a lot of draft capital is, which is that you were bad previously. It's if you're able to improve your team. And because they had so much draft capital going in, they were able to add talent without, while it being kind of a negative return on investment, to the point where they probably added more overall talent. I can take a look at my consensus board grades actually right now. But in terms of total value added, it can be a lot higher than some of the other teams, which I think is the element here that would interest like Vikings fans, right? So, because the Vikings added the least amount of talent out of any team in the NFL, according to the consensus board. In the division, so mind you, the division did really, really poorly in the draft this year. I think all 4 teams placed in the bottom 6 in terms of grade. In fact, let me take a look. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, all 4 teams placed in the bottom 6. But in terms of total value gain, the Bears are clearly at the top of the heap because they had just more, capital to piss away, I guess. I don't know. Is that iTunes approved? But yeah, I think that from the perspective of like an in-division rival, from the perspective of the Bears themselves, seeing how much value that they added in the draft total is kind of worthwhile for us kind of evaluating whether or not the Bears' offseason was something that can be reasonably expected to outproduce what they did last year. And I think offensively, they've made so many improvements there that you would kind of expect it, right? And, a couple of years ago when they added Edwards and Edmonds, I thought that was like a really poor allocation of, free agency resources. Here, I think that they probably did a pretty good job in terms of their trade and free agency resources, that they probably got a fair amount better. Defensively, so long as they don't have to face any Hail Marys, I think they'll be, improved, but maybe not substantially so. But they were already a pretty decent defense. I don't know that Grady Jarrett's going to move the needle for me too much, but yeah, I mean, they should still probably add a pass rush. I don't know that Odeyingbo is going to be kind of enough for them to substantially improve their pass rush. But the back end is pretty good. So that's kind of where I'd put the Bears. Improved enough that I would think that those games aren't really gimmies, which based off of kind of the results last year, aside from the Vikings' luck specifically against the Bears, I think normally we would consider those to be, kind of gimme games given the quality that they demonstrated last year. And this year, I don't think that's going to be the case.
Well, let's go to the Lions because I'm saving Green Bay for last, and maybe it's just because I feel like making sure I can get a couple of barbs in on those lovely people who have all that stock in the Packers. But as far as the Lions are concerned, they've obviously had a major retirement, and they do have players coming back from injury. What can we expect as far as their team going into training camp?
Yeah. So to stick with the topic of the draft, the Lions, like I said, had the worst draft grades according to the consensus big board. And I know that, when you think about that and you think about it in the context of the Lions, it feels like that doesn't matter, that it doesn't stick, right? Like, oh my God, everyone said that about the draft class, where they got like Laporta and Gibbs and all that, which like, I get like why you'd be suspicious of draft grades given that, one of the years that they got poor draft grades, they got, Brian Branch and, they did really well there. But I hesitate on that one because I've heard that a lot. I've heard that from Patriots fans. I've heard that from Seahawks fans. And, when those teams were good, they got really bad draft grades. And a bunch of people are like, well, the Seahawks are just different. And like, yeah, they're different and they got worse because of it. Like just because they were able to generate some positive momentum against a bad draft or against a bad draft grade, I should say, a good draft for sure. Doesn't mean that they were able to consistently do that. And I'd say the same for the Lions. Now, what's really funny is that you point this out to Lions fans and they'll say, we get bad draft grades every year. But if I recall correctly, in fact, like I said, my browser history wanted me to take a look at the 2024 consensus grades a lot for some reason. They actually got pretty good grades in 2024. I'm going to like double check this right now, but like they actually did all right. Yeah, they got plus 24%. They actually got the best grade in the draft last year. So I don't actually think that there's something about the Lions constantly picking against type and not working out well for them. The board loved that they got Terry and Arnold in the first round and Rick Estraw in the second round, right? It really liked the Christian Mahogany pick. The only picks it didn't like were the Sione Vaki picks and the Giovanni Manu picks. And the Giovanni Manu pick kind of doesn't matter because it was like an international. And so it's not something that the consensus board is going to do a good job evaluating correctly. And so you kind of just give them a pass for that. This year it was bad again. And I don't think that they'll get away with it like they did with the Gibbs draft. I think that though some teams will get away with it 1 or 2 years, you don't consistently beat the consensus board over time. No team has been able to do that where they get bad grades and end up with a good class. Now, some of the players that they picked are players that I personally did like more than the consensus board did. A player like Isaac Tesla, a player like Tate Ratledge, their second and third round picks, or second and fifth round. I don't know. They missed a bunch of picks in the middle. Those are guys that I like versus the board, but that doesn't mean that I think that the process here was a smart one. They very much go out of their way to signal that they don't care about what everyone thinks, which is like fun, right? It's fun when your grades are bad and you play well, and it's fun when your grades are good because no one pays attention to when your grades are good. But like I think picking like their 17th nose tackle, which is something the consensus board didn't actually take that much into account. So there's a modifier in the consensus board grading system that does take into account the perceived team need. according to a couple of different resources I use. Like Draft Tech is one of them, Fanspeak is another. There's like a couple of ways to calculate team need by position, and nose tackle obviously was the lowest need. And so it did, but like I think the degree to which the Lions super did not need a nose tackle is not something I think math has the ability to really quantify. Like it's just outside the realm of what my spreadsheets can offer. They only have nose tackles. They've got DJ Reader, who's really good, Aleem McNeil, who is like a nose and a 3, so I guess I get the difference there. They've got Levi and Wuzarike, who had played well last year, but that was kind of it. They drafted Broderick Martin in the 3rd round in 2023, which if you want to talk about draft grades, I think we nailed it with Broderick Martin, right? They signed Roy Lopez, not the chest opening, from Arizona, another nose tackle. It's all nose tackles, right? So they grabbed Tyleik Williams in the 1st round, and that's just another nose tackle. And it's a nose tackle that the consensus board ranked 41st overall. In fact, if you take a look at guys that are kind of plugged into the media, the forecaster board, he ranked 47th. So to pick him like 28th overall is nuts to me. Like why? So it's a lot of that. I don't want to like go too hard on it just because, you can always be wrong, and we were wrong about it pretty recently, but like, I don't know. It feels like you needed to add some pass rush to help Aiden Hutchinson, and instead you just re-signed Marcus Davenport, which like, I don't know, like he signed, he had like 4 years of injury with the Saints. He signed with the Vikings. The warning that all Vikings fans got was that he's injured all the time, and then he got injured. And then he signs with the Lions. And the warning Lions fans got was that he gets injured all the time, then he got injured. And they just re-signed him. So I don't know how you're supporting Aiden Hutchinson, but I guess it's more nose tackles. I guess that's how you do it. So yeah, that's what's happening up front defensively for them. I don't really get how they've improved. And, as, the top of the NFC North, there's like a smaller room for improvement. There's like the ceiling to improve is just harder to achieve, I guess, because you're in theory kind of set up well at a bunch of positions. But I still think that they had opportunities to improve that they didn't take. The one area where I think they did a really good job was when they signed DJ Reed. They also signed Avonte Maddox, which I just assume is going to be kind of like a depth guy. And for a depth guy, that's pretty good. But, having like Brian Branch and Terrion Arnold and DJ Reed and Amik Robertson, who I assume is going to play in the nickel. Maybe DJ Reed's going to play in the nickel. They're both kind of short, but Amik Robertson has like, first of all, he's shorter, but he has like outside corner energy, which is where he's always done well, and where he did well last year when they just kind of picked him up. But yeah, I think the assumption is going to play a fair amount of nickel. Brian Branch also has a ton of nickel experience, so maybe that's just how they do it. They also added Rock Ya-Sin, who I assume is going to be another depth guy that does have like the potential to do more. The secondary is fine. I think it's nice. I think they've got decent depth at corner. I don't know that they've got any depth at safety, but it's kind of hard to develop depth everywhere, especially when you've got 9 nose tackles. I'm not going to get over that. It's so bizarre to me. But I think that the area that they needed to do the most is probably at linebacker. Alex Anzalone is like a pretty good player, but they didn't really add meaningful players in free agency at linebacker. They didn't do it in the draft. And so I think they re-signed Derek Barnes, which I don't super understand because I don't think he's done much for them. And they're kind of just relying on Jack Campbell to like be a good linebacker. And I think I'm kind of behind everyone else on this one because I still don't think he's got it. He certainly wasn't as good as I think a lot of people thought at the beginning of his rookie year. He kind of fell off relatively quickly from there. And, that's going to happen. But I don't know that he's gained it back. I don't know that he's seen, everything quickly enough. On offense, I think that's kind of the story for them. Ben Johnson's gone, so we need to kind of see how that offense is going to evolve. Their offensive coordinator now is John Morton, who, if I remember correctly, I'm not going to look it up. If I remember correctly, was briefly the Jets offensive coordinator, and he's like a super weird guy, like interpersonally. One of the things, brief side tangent, one of the things that was kind of interesting about the Grant Udinsky story before he got hired, I think it was by the Jaguars, as the assistant quarterbacks coach, is that at one point for the feature, I think was it Ben Gessling wrote it, he needs to contact Udinsky, and the person he's talking to is like, I don't know, I think he's in the woods. That apparently happened all the time with John Morton. He would just go into the Rocky Mountain wilderness at times, and like not during the season, but like, and just would be impossible to communicate, which I think was the reason he was let go by the Jets, even though the offense was kind of doing all right, given the level of talent that they had, which is not very much. So yeah, keep that in mind, I guess. That's the story I have about John Morton. That's yeah. But yeah, I don't know that they're going to be able to have the offensive acumen necessary to kind of put everything together because I think it's really, really difficult to design an offense that relies on explosive runs and be a consistent offense. And they kind of were. They're going to have to, I think, rely a little bit more on Jared Goff, which they're more than happy to do given the level of regard that they have for him. But I just think it's a little bit different. And I don't know that it's all going to come together for them in the same way like it has over the past couple of years. And I've often been like a Detroit Lions offense skeptic. So like take everything with a grain of salt because I've been pretty wrong about them for the past couple of years. But I don't super see it with Jameson Williams. Obviously, Amon-Ra had a really great year last year and he's been pretty good over the past couple of years. But I think that's kind of it in terms of wide receivers. You know, Tim Patrick is a great story. I like him a lot. He got injured pretty close to the beginning of the season last year. Now they're relying on like Khalif Raymond, maybe Isaac Tesla, super, super raw, incredible athlete, but super raw player from Arkansas, I want to say, 3rd round pick for them. I don't know that they've got the receiving weapons, and they've got, like, as always, just a buffet of running backs to work with, and I just don't know that that's something that you can do without Ben Johnson there. We'll see. But kind of the more interesting thing is that Pride of Victoria, Minnesota, Frank Ragnow retired. Tate Ratledge is supposed to kind of take over his role. And if you pay attention to like local news for the Lions, like I don't mean like Lions Twitter, like the bloggers for the Lions, maybe they're doing this too, but like the local radio stations and stuff like that, they're really excited about the fact that Tate Ratledge like loves to hunt, which also Frank Ragnow did. I did, as if he's like dead, which Frank Ragnow presumably still does. But you know, that's not like good evidence that like he's good at playing center, right? Like, Are we confident that if Garrett Bradbury had just started hunting and fishing that he would have been good? Probably not. So we'll see. He's a 2nd round pick from this year, and he's going to have to take over, I think, faster than they expected. So I don't know. Taylor Decker is kind of getting up there in age. Graham Glasgow is getting up there in age. So the strength of the Lions has been that offensive line. They've cycled through a couple of people. You know, like I said, 2 years ago, they had Jonah Jackson. They had Ricky Wagner a couple of years ago before they grabbed Penei Sewell. They keep on cycling through people, and it kind of keeps working, but I don't know. This feels like the end of the line. I did say I liked Christian Mahogany a lot. He is a 6th round pick, right? So I don't know that that's going to be enough. They've got a 2nd round pick that they didn't expect to be starting. They've got Christian Mahogany, a 6th round pick. Then they've got 2 players that are probably a little bit older, 2 2016 draft picks, and Taylor Decker and Graham Glasgow. So the offensive line has been the strength for them, but I just don't know that that's going to hold up for much longer. So while I think the Bears got better in a less optimal way, I think the Lions probably got worse. But that doesn't mean the Lions are going to be worse than the Bears, right? If we're only taking a look at the way that these teams have improved or not improved over the past 2 years, yeah, I think the Bears have done a better job improving, but the Lions are just a better team. So I think that it makes sense to be skeptical of this Lions team. Again, I've been a Lions skeptic for a while and I've been proven wrong. But I think that there are reasons to be skeptical of this team based off of their offseason, and kind of excited to see that end, because I don't know, Lions fans have been getting kind of annoying. So that's where I stand.
They've been getting success, and that the universe is designed for the opposite to happen. So this isn't okay.
Yeah, I'm beginning to understand. And mind you, I'm saying this as somebody who covers the Vikings, right? Like I am not the category I'm about to describe. I get it, but I get why old money gets annoyed at new money now, right?
New success, just it's weird to see. You kind of thumb your nose at it like, oh God, act like you've been there before when they haven't. They absolutely haven't.
Like I was happy for Lions fans 3 years ago when this was working, but now I'm just like, all right, it's we've had our fun.
It's time for the market correction to hit. Like and watch Green Bay and watch Jordan Love on Green Bay just throw to receivers whose names that he may not even know either. Which leads us to Green Bay. Do they have any receivers now? That was always a question. You could also ask, do they have a quarterback? But do they have receivers first?
Oh, they've got like 20 starting quality receivers, but they're all wide receiver 2s, and Christian Watson. Yeah. So the receiver cast is like a really outstanding. Like, man, I'd love to add that guy to my team that has a high-level receiver. It's Romeo Doubs, it's Jaden Reed, it's Dontavian Wicks, it's allegedly Christian Watson, and then they've added Matthew Golden this year as well as Savion Williams. I thought Matthew Golden was the better of the two Texas receivers, so I don't mind that he is, like, in a broad sense, a first-round pick. But I think that he's and this is one where the Packers gained value against the consensus board very slightly. I think the board considers it like I've got positive value, negative value, and washes, which are within 15% of their pick category. And this is technically, I think it's a wash, which I think the first round is pretty good. He's fine. I think he does a pretty decent job at all of the elements that you would expect in all-around receiver to do, right? And I think that's kind of it. Like, he had a really good 40-yard dash time, and that's what a lot of people were focusing on during the draft and also, of course, during the combine. But I don't know that he plays with the speed that you would expect somebody who runs like a sub 3, right? That was a sub 3 to play with, right? So I'm going to pull up the scouting report that Dane Brugler wrote. But it's not a receiver that I think can carry an offense in the same way that I don't really think that he did that for Texas. I don't really see the Packers having added a premier receiver. And I think it's good to ask the question, like, does that matter? Does every offense like need a Justin Jefferson or a Jamar Chase or whatever, right? Okay, but I think that if you're designing an offense, I don't know that the Packers have a way to like effectively do that where they can call plays and just know that they're going to get something out of it. Like the Vikings have plays where they're just like, Justin Jefferson just kind of needs to save our ass. So this is the play for that. Like, which is nice. I think every team kind of needs that. And I don't know that they have a receiver that, like, I just can't imagine calling Jaden Reed really needs to save our ass. Let's call this play. Like, no, that's not the thing, right? I don't know that he's got kind of everything he needs. He isn't a super athlete, despite I think the 4.29 40. I don't think he's got the physicality to win in routes. And so I think for an intermediate kind of 3-level receiver who doesn't have a standout physical trait, physical testing trait, which again, he tested really well in the 40-yard dash. But I think from the perspective of like, we're comparing jumping ability and agility and speed as we see it on the field. If he doesn't have one of those, I would want him to have at least play strength. And I think he doesn't super have that. He's not a very good blocker. He didn't play on special teams. And so I see him as like a good ad for a lot of teams. Like, this is a guy that I would maybe prefer over Jordan Addison as a complement to Justin Jefferson, but I just don't see him carrying that offense. And I think the idea was a couple of years ago, Christian Watson would be that guy, but we know he's not. And he probably has better hands than the rest of this core combined, which is like nice. Like that's something that they super need. But I don't know that this receiving core is it. So we'll see about that. On the offensive line, where Green Bay used to be outstanding in, they've got two really good players in Elton Jenkins and Zach Tom. Outside of that, I don't know. They've got a super athlete in Sean Ryan. They've got Rasheed Walker. I want to see the Stanford guy, 7th round pick, who was like a really high level recruit and then just got hurt a bunch. And so he never put together like a full season. If I'm remembering the guy correctly. No, he's Penn State. No, I'm thinking about a different guy. Walker Little is who I'm thinking of. Rasheed Walker. So I think he played on the right side. They're going to play him on the left side. We'll see kind of what happens with him. He's a 7th round pick. They're supposed to be pretty good at developing these guys. They did draft Anthony Belton from NC State in the 2nd round. Maybe he'll play, but I don't know. The interesting thing here is the signing of Aaron Banks, who was bad for San Francisco, and then they gave this guy like a lot of money. And I think all of the Packers quarterbacks over the years have held onto the ball for a fairly long time and have put a lot of stress on their offensive lines. And they've been able to get away with that because of how outstanding some of these offensive linemen were for them. And I don't know that they're in that outstanding category anymore, and it's going to be a problem. Aaron Rodgers would really avoid interceptable passes and instead take sacks or throw the ball away when he was put in a pressure situation. Jordan Love very much wants to avoid the sack more than anything else, and he's not a super throw the ball away guy. So we're probably going to see a couple of interceptions as this offensive line continues to degrade. And also, like, you know the take. I don't think that he's a very good quarterback. I don't think he's a bad quarterback. I just don't think he's a very good quarterback. And so I think we'll see a lot of really high volatility stuff when you don't have a receiver to make you good, and you don't have the discernment to take easy wins at quarterback. So that's kind of my take on the offense. Defensively, I think they just need, like, Edgerrin Cooper did a really good job last year, but I think they need just a little bit more because it's an aging out defensive line. They're not getting what they need out of Devontae Wyatt, so it's supposed to be like, Kenny Clark, right, doing a lot. Rashawn Gary, who's not like old, but Rashawn Gary, I don't think, like, he was really good 2 years ago. He had his moments last year. I feel like he's falling off a little bit faster, so we'll see about that. But they didn't really add anyone that I think is going to take significant time from anyone except for like Nate Hobbs, because they've had some problems at cornerback with injury. And so they had to let some of those guys go, including Eric Stokes, who I was right about. Just want to put that out there. And yeah, it's Keyshawn Nixon, who was the best returner in the league a couple years ago at outside corner. It's Javon Bullard at nickel. It's Nate Hobbs on the outside too. It's not as good of a secondary as I think we're used to seeing. Obviously, we know that they lost Jair Alexander. Yeah, I don't know. They've got Xavier McKinney. That's who they have in the secondary. So I think the defense is going to fall off a little bit. I think that the offense is going to tread water, but it's going to be really volatile in a lot of ways. Yeah, I would characterize this as probably the only team in the division that we're getting worse kind of mattered for them. Like, I think the Detroit Lions got a little bit worse. I think the Packers got worse, but I think that their tolerance for getting worse is a lot lower than the Lions. So that's kind of where I'm at.
So now that we've kind of gone around the NFC North, there is something I wanted to bring up, and it is something that you wrote about as well. You had just put out a piece that was discussing Pablo Torre, and specifically his writing about the NFL antitrust stuff. And a lot of news has kind of come out over the last couple of days about that as well. And it's a bit troubling, I think, is the best word for it, when the head of the players union is also in charge of, well, you'll be better at describing this.
Yeah. Long story short, there is a petition to remove Lloyd Howell as the executive director of the NFL Players Association, and the petition lists 7 reasons. Financial misconduct at his previous place of employment, where he was the chief financial officer, a consultancy firm called Booz Allen Hamilton. Secretive and corrupt hiring process, a catastrophic decision that lost $7 million for the players by refusing to negotiate in good faith with the trading card company Panini, the investigation with one team who he's on the board of. I'll explain that in a second. Hiding the collusion ruling, which is primarily what my piece is about, and his conflict of interest, or one of the things. His conflict of interest with the Carlyle Group. The Carlyle Group is one of the private equity firms that has exclusive permission to be one of the teams that can buy up to a 10% share of an NFL team. And so being on the board of a private equity firm that very soon might own an NFL team means that he's creating a conflict of interest where his personal financial interests are at cross purposes with the players he's representing. He would be aligned with NFL ownership, and he'd make more money as somebody on the board of Carlyle Group than he would, making a better situation for the players. And then the 7th thing that they list is a pattern of poor judgment, which includes a bunch of the other stuff above. So that's the short version of it. The long version's quite long. You can either listen to Pablo Torre's 2 podcasts on it, which I think are well worth listening to, or you can read my piece or whatever, right? There's been a lot of reporting. ESPN has put out 2 reports, reporting from Don Van Natta and Kalen Kaler. They both wrote both pieces. So they co-wrote 2 pieces each. One that uncovered the conflict of interest of the Carlyle Group, where so he has a $3.6 billion salary from the NFLPA. He has earned just last year at probably, because we don't know because the Carlyle Group is privately owned, so they're not publicly traded, so we don't know what the compensation packages are, but probably $1 million just from the 3 private equity firms that he's on the board of. Like that's crazy, and creates a really significant conflict of interest for him. So who is he, right? Like why am I talking about this guy named Lloyd Howell? He's not an NFL player. So he is the executive director of the NFLPA. The way that he got there, the way that he replaced the previous executive director, DeMaurice Smith, who a lot of people didn't like, is through an election from player representatives from all 32 teams. How was he nominated? How was he vetted? Well, as Pablo Torre points out, his nomination process to become an executive director was unlike any other executive director nomination process in the NFLPA's history. They changed the NFLPA constitution from requiring that the board produce 2 to 4 candidates and announce them 30 days before the vote to no kind of restrictions on the maximum or minimum number of candidates and not having a disclosure requirement. So players found out about the sole candidate, or player representatives, I should say, found out about the sole candidate who they found through a search firm. By the way, the search firm, some of the members of the NFLPA board are also on the board of that search firm. So that's another great conflict of interest. But they found out about the sole candidate to be executive director hours before the meeting where they would confirm their vote for him. That's crazy. So that's the corruption that the petition is referring to. Now, why is he a candidate at all? Why would he be such an interesting person to lead the executive directorship team? Does he have legal experience? Well, no. But does he have experience like leading a Fortune 500 company? Yeah, kind of. So he's the chief financial officer of Booz Allen Hamilton. They are a consultancy firm that primarily specializes in providing third-party intelligence. Bloomberg put them as the world's most profitable spy agency, but like not as cool as The Kingsman, right? Like that. Remember the movie The Kingsman? I just like watched all 3 of those movies like last week, so they're in my head.
Just wasn't
not as cool as that. Yeah. Man, they really ruined the third. Everyone agrees with that, but man, that third one sucked. High highs, very low lows. But
he was at Booz Allen Hamilton that provided a bunch of resources for the United States federal government. That's their primary consumer or customer. But they also do contracts around the world for various other organizations, like, the Saudi government. No big deal. Don't worry about it. Intelligence for the Saudi government must be above board. So they also often replace federal workers. And whenever the federal government is having an issue with their own unionized public servants, they will often hire consultancy firms like Booz Allen Hamilton to fill in the gap, which means they are professional scabs. I think it's weird for a union to hire a guy who is the chief financial officer of Scab CIA, but that's what they did. And what's crazy is that they weren't even good at it. Every time my understanding, I could be wrong about the specifics here. I'm speaking off the cuff here. But it sounds like the majority of their contracts with the Saudi government did not make them money. They lost money in a lot of those contracts. And so they would then charge those losses to the United States federal government, allegedly. This hasn't been proven because this was settled out of court. So no one has admitted guilt. But they settled for $337 million. They settled for $333 million to get out of this fraud case where they defrauded the United States federal government. They took almost, $337 billion, probably more because it's a settlement, right? Let's say they took $1 billion from taxpayers. This guy was the chief financial officer, right? This is not like, oh, he was head of IT. He wasn't part of this problem. And the whistleblower alleges who she walked away with $75 million. Good for her. There's like a whistleblower program where like you get like a small portion of the amount of damages. So I guess in this case, probably 750 million instead of $1 billion. But and then she's like put a lot of it into like charitable trusts and nonprofits and stuff like that. Anyway, she was an accountant, like a former Marine who then became an accountant for Booz Allen Hamilton. And she noticed this problem where a bunch of contracts that were running negative suddenly were turning positive after charges to the United States federal government to make up those losses. She was like, wow, that's a weird accounting error, which is like that's sweet. That's very a wholesome interpretation of the spy agency you work for. So she brings it up to executives and they're like, oh yeah, we'll super get on this for sure. Whip up a presentation, but don't write anything down. That's actually what happened, by the way. Please, why did you write this down? Was definitely like one of the things that she alleges was said to her. So she puts together this presentation, which, she wrote down like a fool. A fool who made $75 million from writing it down. Presents this to people who work in the finance department and organized, I believe, at least 2 meetings with Lloyd Howell, or at least got one meeting and then tried to get another. And he said, "Oh yeah, we'll take a look at this." And then later, when she followed up on it, was told, and I don't know if it was by him or by someone else, we have moved that to like the bottom of a priority list. So finding $750 million to $1 billion worth of fraud, that's low on the priority list for Booz Allen Hamilton. And the chief financial officer leaves the company and becomes the executive director of the NFL Players Union, where he immediately lays off half of their legal department. Now, he says the reason for that is because the legal department lost a lawsuit with Panini, and because they illegally organized like an exclusivity arrangement with Topps football cards. So yeah, a bunch of stuff. A bunch of stuff happened. He fired half the legal staff. That's who's like running the NFLPA. Now, none of that has anything to do directly with what we're talking about here. So in my piece, I kind of go over what Pablo Torre also goes over, which is this collusion case. So the NFL did not love when Deshaun Watson got a fully guaranteed contract, but for different reasons than when you and I didn't love it.
Yeah,
you and I didn't love
it. Nothing about morality, nothing about moral causes, nothing about like there's a lot of unsolved mysteries going. No, nothing about that.
Yeah, we didn't love it because of the alleged sexual misconduct, like normal people, right? The NFL didn't love it because it hurt their negotiating position with other players. Gotta love capitalism, man. So they say that kind of publicly that they don't love that, but that itself is not evidence of collusion, right? Like saying that you don't love that another team signed a player is weird, typically, maybe not in this case, but not itself a sign of collusion. You typically don't talk about other players and other teams because you don't want to be seen as tampering, but like this is, not that. So, great. I would say that the best example of how this materialized is the Lamar Jackson case. So again, in my piece, I go into a lot of detail about when Lamar Jackson was given a non-exclusive franchise tag, which allowed him to negotiate with other teams, and if other teams put together an offer sheet that the Ravens couldn't or wouldn't match, they would then send 2 first-round picks over to the Ravens. And then they would get, in return, Lamar Jackson at like $55 million a year or whatever. Personally, I think the majority of teams in the NFL would trade 2 first-round picks and $55 million of cap space per year to Lamar Jackson. I think that makes sense in order to acquire one of the 3 best quarterbacks in the NFL. Mind you, back in 2022, 2023, he was only like the 8th best quarterback in the NFL. So,
and it was
totally different environment.
It was so weird. It was just so weird when this was going on because there was no talking at all to him.
Yeah, and like it's one thing if like a team didn't offer, like no teams offered him a contract because through conversations with him and negotiations with him, they just couldn't meet his terms. Like that would be one thing. That would be weird for sure. But he's representing himself. Maybe he like overestimated his value, which is, I hate even giving credence to that idea, but like let's say that might be maybe what happened. That would be one thing, but that's not the thing that happened. The thing that happened was that no team tried to contact him at all. Like they didn't pick up the phone to call him. They never tried to contact him. He goes to the NFL Combine to have meetings with teams, and nobody does that. Meanwhile, the Atlanta Falcons are trying to trade for Deshaun Watson, and the Carolina Panthers, the New York Jets, and the New Orleans Saints all hold meetings with Derek Carr. I would imagine more than those 3 teams talk to Derek Carr, but those are the 3 that we know about. Okay. And then one team, the Saints, were able to sign him. The Jets talked to like 6 or 7 different quarterbacks. People like, obviously Aaron Rodgers, but like Ryan Tannehill, Jimmy Garoppolo, Derek Carr, a bunch of different quarterbacks, 6, 7 quarterbacks. Jacoby Brissett to be their starter, to replace Zach Wilson. They never remotely considered Lamar Jackson. And so the argument that the NFLPA is putting forward is that this was a case where all of the owners agreed and executives not to offer Lamar Jackson in order to diminish his market and prevent him from achieving what he really wanted, which was a fully guaranteed contract, which is the reason that he never agreed in the first couple of rounds of negotiations with the Ravens to a contract, because he wanted a fully guaranteed contract, never got it. And because he didn't have any other suitors to leverage against the Ravens, he didn't get a fully guaranteed contract. Now, he got a pretty good one. So the NFL brings forward a collusion case arguing that, like the Lamar Jackson example, along with examples I don't think are as strong, Kyler Murray and Russell Wilson, who all sought fully guaranteed contracts and didn't receive them, are the parties damaged by this collusion, right? And so they want a fully guaranteed contracts, didn't receive them. And the arbitrator goes through, we've got a discovery process. So we have access to slideshows that the NFL Management Council put together at the owners' meeting. We have access to a bunch of texts between owners and front office executives. And in it, essentially, the arbitrator concludes with pretty damning evidence that the NFL really strongly tried to collude as hard as possible. They really tried to collude, but they failed. There's no evidence to show that any contracts were changed as a result of what are clearly indications from the NFL Management Council to try and reduce the amount of guaranteed money. I personally think that that's stupid. I also think it's a smoking gun in terms of, the public relations war, however important that might be, between the NFLPA and the NFL. The NFL very clearly tried to screw players out of guaranteed contracts by illegally engaging in collusive behavior. So in addition to the fact that it is against the law for oligopolies, which is what all of the NFL teams collectively together would be under the NFL umbrella, to coordinate with each other to impact the market for what they're about to do. And in this case, I guess it's an oligopsony. I don't know how these words work, but they would be a single buyer of NFL labor, and then they would collude together to drive down the cost or whatever with fully guaranteed monies, drive down the cost of labor in a way that would violate the law. Now, the law doesn't apply here because it is being subsumed or replaced with the comprehensive bargaining agreement. I go into the history of why that matters, what the difference here is, and why a union, which is also in some ways, maybe not legally, but in some ways a monopoly, why a union would alter the circumstances by which one would bring an antitrust lawsuit against the NFL for this kind of stuff. But in the comprehensive bargaining agreement, it also bans collusion. And the NFL has been implicated for this before. So it's also collusion to agree not to sign players. And the NFLPA brought a lawsuit or brought an arbitration grievance on behalf of Colin Kaepernick and Eric Reed, arguing that they were being blacklisted by the NFL. And then the NFL chose to settle instead of letting it go to court, which, maybe the NFL would have won. But importantly, it prevented discovery. It prevented the ability of these documents to go public. So, and that must have escaped arbitration either through a dissolution of the union or because they appealed it past arbitration. Because usually if you sue an entity that you have an agreement that has an arbitration clause in it, the courts will kick you back to the arbitrator, and you have to prove that the arbitrator was, I think it's substantively unfair or something along those lines. And that's extremely difficult, which is why one of the things that labor lawyers tell you to watch out for when you agree to a contract with an employer is to watch out specifically for arbitration clauses, because those arbitrators, especially in that circumstance, less so in the NFLPA circumstance, but arbitrators are paid by the employer, not by the employee, and they're not paid for how correct their decisions are. An employer will stop going to the arbitrator if the arbitrator, whose rulings are binding, consistently rules against the employer. So there's a bunch of studies that show that that's the case, that arbitrators consistently rule in favor of the employer. If you bring this up in an employment law subreddit, as an example, hypothetically, you will get people who work in arbitration who will tell you strenuously that this is not the case. I don't care who's paying me. I am paid to make the correct decision. And I just got to tell you, man, I don't care how much legal training you have. All humans believe they're unbiased. I'm just going to leave it at that. The NFL arbitrators, so there's multiple types of arbitrators. In some circumstances, the arbitrators are picked by the NFL. That's not what this is. This is a, quote, system arbitrator. And so you basically have to be mutually agreed upon. And they did pick, in this case, an arbitrator who doesn't have a history necessarily of working with the NFL. But in the past, when there's been system arbitrators, they do have a history of working with the NFL, and the NFLPA has had to bring forth additional grievances and or even lawsuits alleging that the NFL picked an arbitrator who has a conflict of interest because he's worked for the NFL before. It's strange. But anyway, they have to go through an arbitration agreement, and the arbitrator comes with this strange ruling that they tried to collude and they couldn't. So, as a lesson, and this is so hypothetical, you wouldn't believe how hypothetical this was. But if I tried to frame Luke Braun for a crime, hypothetically, in an imaginary theoretical world, and I failed to do so, in most courts of law, as far as I understand, that itself is still a crime, which is why I wouldn't do it. But like most of the time, most crimes are also crimes if you attempt to commit them and fail. Uniquely, some crimes are only crimes if you attempt to commit them, but if you succeed, it's not a crime. I'm not going to tell you which one that is. That's like a riddle for you to solve.
Yeah, that's definitely more of a, we're going to just let the mask do the talking here.
Yeah, for sure. So that's that. So this turned out to be a win for the NFL because they were not, forced to award damages. But substantively, like this is a rhetorical win for the NFLPA, and they chose to hide this ruling. So we're only finding this out now, even though the ruling was last year, or 6 months ago or something. They chose not to disclose it, and typically one side will choose not to disclose the ruling, and then the side that, from a PR perspective, is going to look better usually does. And the NFLPA chose to hide the ruling. Now, why did they do that? We don't know. Pablo Torre alleges, potentially, suggests maybe, that the reason is because in the footnote to the ruling, there are references to texts that the chief of strategy and then president J.C. Tretter, who used to be a senator for the Browns, he allegedly wanted to hide the ruling potentially because the text he sent about Russell Wilson accepting a non-fully guaranteed deal, calling him a wuss and, quote, something worse, which I assume isn't the N-word. I assume, I don't know. But that's allegedly why he chose to hide it. We don't know, but it's interesting that Lloyd Howell has continued to run cover for J.C. Tretter because J.C. Tretter was at the center of the direction to pick Lloyd Howell. So it's a whole thing. This summary was a very short summary of the Pablo Torre podcast and of the piece, but there's collusion, there's deception, there's corruption, all of the shuns that you don't want to be.
All of them?
Many of them. There's probably a near infinite number of shuns, but I thought I'd want to cover my bases there.
Well, there certainly is that, and I'd say poor Russell Wilson, but
he's fine.
He and Sierra will deal with things, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, he exceeded the touchdown toilet ratio last year, right? So he's good.
2 years ago, yeah, that was important. He did manage to accomplish that. All right, let's go to the mailbag. Kenneth Allen asks, "I'm really interested in learning what to look for when a quarterback develops. What should we be looking for as far as positive and negative signs when we see McCarthy play real snaps? When do data points turn into evidence of patterns, and when can we start to celebrate or worry?"
I think that it depends on the strength and weakness profile of like the specific player in question. So for McCarthy, if we wanted to take a look at the strength and weakness profile that he has from, let's say Dane Brugler's scouting reports, because I have that up in front of me. Probably ball location, accuracy, those kinds of things. Like, not is the ball getting to the player that you're targeting, but where that ball is when it gets to that player. So, and this was an issue that I guess I'd kind of noticed a little bit when I was looking at McCarthy in that year's draft. But like he would throw to the wrong shoulder, and that would force the receiver to kind of lean into the defense as opposed to away from the defense. It reduced the amount of like yards after catch opportunities that he was able to produce, those kinds of things, right? I think that seeing him kind of manipulate coverage would be a strong sign that he's kind of moved forward. But I think that kind of like one thing that we're probably looking for as an athlete that likes to take on contact, which this one was kind of a weird one because he was in the same draft class as Jaden Daniels, and no one loved to take on contact more than Jaden Daniels. Like he would just run right into people that were literally twice his weight. And McCarthy didn't have that, but he did seek out contact more than probably he should have. And so that's somebody where I'd want to take a look at kind of the triangle, essentially, of interceptable plays versus throwaways versus sacks, right? And all of those are negatives, right? But a lot of quarterbacks don't have the ability to eliminate all three. Some have to pick one or two of them to eliminate. And if he is picking interceptable passes, that's the worst one. But it might be a response to how quickly pressure arrives and how much he's been trained to kind of get away from contact now that was identified as a weakness of his. So if he is throwing the ball away, that's the most ideal outcome out of those three. But if he's taking on sacks, that's at least better than throwing interceptable passes. So we want to see that. We want to see how he responds to pressure. We want to see how quickly he gets rid of the ball at the top of his drop. And I think that's probably the best way to determine from like a casual fan's perspective if he's seeing the field correctly and quickly enough. If at the top of his drop, he's getting rid of the ball, that's probably a good sign. It's not universal, and sometimes the timing of routes are a little bit different, where you get to the top of your drop, and then you hitch one step or hitch two steps, and then you're supposed to get rid of the ball. And from there, you can usually tell if the receiver is breaking at what point in the drop back that they're doing that. But for the most part, if he's getting rid of the ball at the top of his drop, then probably a lot of other things are going really, really well. So that's probably the biggest sign. When do data points turn into evidence of patterns? Probably after about 100 dropbacks. That's when it's time to start worrying or time to start celebrating. But, a lot of things can change. Kyler Murray always does well at the beginning of the season. We've seen a lot of rookies do well for the first half of the season and fall off in the second half. So I would be cautious just kind of in general of embracing a pattern. I wasn't even on the Justin Jefferson train as like a high-level receiver. I was like, oh, he's probably good. I wasn't on him as a high-level receiver until like game 7. I was pretty late to the party because I was just like, I don't know what parts of these are trends and what parts of these are they just happen to be the whatever. So I tend to be cautious about these things, even when they're positives.
Let's go to Ben, who asks, why is the Flores defense such a nightmare for opposing quarterbacks, and will it cover up the potential deficit of talent in our secondary?
It's unique. No one else does it. It's really difficult to prepare for a defense that you never see. That can't be the only reason. Otherwise, we'd have at least one NFL team running like the triple option on offense, and we don't see that. And if they did, I think a lot of people are pretty confident it would fail. I would love to test that theory. I would love for, the Lions to try it out. But that I think is one element here. I think another element here is that it is built on pretty sound principles. It has a claim to all of the areas of the field that matter. And then it has responses to areas of the field where they're not covering. So, for example, if they only have 4 in coverage, they make sure that those 4 coverage defenders are in spots where, based off of their film study, it's likely that the offense is going to do the most damage if the pass rush doesn't get home. And then, of course, they have this pass rush. And they generate unique and interesting pass rush plans that are more than just sending 6 or 7 guys, although they do that a lot. They also only send 3 guys a lot. They did that more than any other team in the NFL 2 years ago. And I think also last year, I didn't get the data for that last year, but definitely 2 years ago. And so with all of that, it's really difficult to get your offensive line to prepare. It's really difficult to set your protections correctly. And if you anticipate a blitz and it's not a blitz, and you've set a hot read up, you've eliminated one of your routes because your hot read isn't going to be there anymore. Now they're no longer in the timing of the route. And so now you have to go through these other routes, which are covered pretty well because there's 8 people in coverage. And now somebody who is being blocked by 2 offensive linemen has a genuine chance to create pressure. So it's a good defense because it takes advantage of those things. But I think the thing that takes it over the top is the blitzes are designed so that there is an out. They're designed in a way so that there's an obvious answer for quarterbacks to take. And every quarterback and every offense has a different approach to what those answers will be on a particular play. But the Vikings defense, based off of their film study, knows what those tendencies are going to produce. and then they sneak a player into that spot. That's why Van Ginkel has like had 2 pick sixes last year. Like, it's because we're going to send this blitz and we're going to create what looks like a hole in the coverage that they're going to attack in response to this blitz, and then we're going to punish them for it. So that's how they create a lot of turnovers. So that's why it was so good. There's a ton of things that make the Brian Flores defense unique and different. We've covered it over at Wide Left in a bunch of different ways. But that, I think, is the essential kind of like, quick-ish, straight philosophy on why that works.
Let's go to Jordy, who asks, Kwesi generally seems to have a preference for big schools in the draft, but should we read anything further into his first pick and 3 of his 4 drafts being from a team that won the national championship the season prior? Does he really value that, quote, winning mentality?
As far as I can tell from Kwesi pressers, the fact of a championship win is not that significantly important, but it does seem as if they prioritize playoff experience. And if you are indexing for college playoff experience, you're going to end up with a lot of national champions on your roster, right? Especially over the past couple of years. Now, going forward, that's not necessarily going to be the case because, it's a bigger playoff. But I think that that's a big part of it. We saw that, especially when he talked about Will Reichert, right? Like, we loved how he turned up big in the playoffs for Alabama. And they talked about like, JJ McCarthy bouncing back and stuff like that. So I think it kind of matters, but not in the obvious, well, you won, so you must be good kind of thing. So I think that plays a role. I think also, and I think it's easy to overanalyze the way Kwesi Adofo-Mensah discusses the way he picks players in the context of analytics, because he doesn't actually tend to use what we understand like from publicly available data and public analytics. He doesn't use the same models or approaches. He seems to think of it as a way of thinking more than, the determined use of particular types of data that we're familiar with. So I don't want to overemphasize this point, but it may be the case that his approach, which is grounded in maybe analytics potentially, prioritizes finding players who compete and succeed against better competition, because that in theory reduces the amount of uncertainty that you have about, how good they are. Now, that's not perfect, obviously. Otherwise, more people would draft national champions and people from the SEC and Big Ten. But it's something, right? It didn't produce, a good safety from Lewis Seen, but it might be, evidence for why Donovan Jackson, is an interesting or good prospect. So, yeah, I don't know that there's anything huge here in terms of national champion, but I do think that there's probably something here for playoff participant, which for a while just came from, 4 different teams.
Next question is going to be from Andrew, who asks, as training camp approaches, I can remember in years past a wide variety of media members receiving access to the team during the offseason / regular season. Any insight into what caused the team to shift back to pretty much only allowing the traditional beat reporters into TCO?
Not really. I wish I did. I would say that they wanted to prioritize, and this is probably the argument that they would make, is they wanted to prioritize the writers and reporters who do the day in, day out stuff, show up to practice every single day during the season, go to every game, stuff like that. And I know that when I was a more traditional beat reporter, I don't think I was probably ever like a traditional beat reporter because I didn't do as much insider coverage and stuff like that. And I didn't do daily writing like a lot of them did. But I know that my access to features that I wanted to write was somewhat inhibited by the fact that I wasn't driving to practice every single day because I was doing, X, Y, or Z other thing instead of going to like Wednesday practice. I'm not saying that wasn't important for me to do, but you have to, make decisions about where your priorities are in some situations. And for the purposes of what my job required me to do, it was better for me not to go on like that Wednesday, right? And because of that, if we were both working, if two people were working on a feature, it was more likely to go to the guy that would show up every day. And I think that practice has extended probably into the less traditional reporting roles, which include stuff like training camp. It wouldn't surprise me, though, if they've placed a higher emphasis on making sure that players interact with media members who they've been able to more adequately vet and have a stronger relationship with and aren't worried are going to be some kind of reputational or other kind of risk to their players. But I don't know that last one for sure. So I can't give you a really good answer on that. I do know that they have explicitly, I don't know publicly, but I don't think that they would mind me saying this. They have explicitly prioritized people who in whatever words that they want to use, like, quote, put in the work.
So there's that. Nolan Kaler asks, for North Code, how will Shedeur Sanders see his game revived when he decides the superior game is the place to take his talents after being disrespected in the draft? We haven't gone to North Code in a while.
Yeah, and since then I've learned that Tyler Forness, who used to do Vikings Wire and is now at A to Z Sports, is a super huge CFL fan. So that's actually probably the guy you want to ask for that. But no, I don't think Dylan Gabriel is going to beat out Shedeur Sanders. So I don't see that as like a likely possibility. That said, I think he would thrive in the CFL because he tended to do better in big open games like in the Big 12 than in kind of the more closed games of the NFL. But that's neither here nor there.
Let's go to VA Vike, who asks, 50-year-old Vikes fan here. The season feels different. Is it the same old season hype, or is there something behind the optimism?
VA, I want to say that I get this question, not every year, for sure not every year, but a lot of years. And I don't want to like disrespect your history of being a Vikings fan. Certainly it's more storied than mine. But like, certainly you've seen that, right? Like you had to have felt that like 2018 when the Vikings got their star quarterback, Kirk Cousins, to pair with the best defense in the NFL. That was huge, right? Or, 2020 before, all the stuff. I guess, all the stuff was during the summer, but like, I think a lot of people were excited about 2020. I don't know. It doesn't, from my perspective, it doesn't actually feel that different because I think there's so much uncertainty surrounding their rookie quarterback. I think that there is a lot of optimism, but I know that the optimism is the same as they're going to win the Super Bowl. And I think that that's kind of the attitude people had in like 2018, right? Like, oh, they're going to win the Super Bowl. They got rid of the bad quarterback that we love. Let's be clear, we love him, but he wasn't like the best quarterback in the world. And they brought in a, let's say, good quarterback, and that's all you need because you got the best defense in the NFL. We're going to win the Super Bowl. And, people very strongly believe that defense wins Super Bowls more than they do now, even though there's actually better evidence now that defense wins Super Bowls than there was in like 2018. Doesn't matter. I think it probably feels a little bit different, not more optimistic, just because I don't think we've ever had a quarterback that we've liked put into an environment that we were confident was good, right? Like a lot of rookie quarterbacks that the Vikings have had, or a lot of like quarterbacks that they just bring in general, have been put into like offenses where we're like, man, that offensive line is like bad, or that receiver core just doesn't have it. Because like before 2015, the Vikings hadn't had a good receiver core in like 10 years. And after 2015, they didn't have a good offensive line for the next 8 years, right? And so like, having both of those is exciting, and being able to put a quarterback in an environment that you're pretty confident they're going to succeed in, just like the 2009 environment was outstanding, feels probably different. So that's probably where it's coming from. But I don't know that there's a lot of people suggesting that the Vikings are Super Bowl bound.
If anything, it really is just a situation where we're just excited at this new prospect, and he's done the right things, he's said the right things, and we saw just a glimpse of it last year before he was taken away for injury. So it's a rookie quarterback, and he looks not terrible. We'll take that. Christian Ponder sucks. I That seems like a non
Or
sequitur.
did the Vikings fail him?
Oh my god. Just for that, Mal asks, who's the best dancer of the two of us?
Well, it's you, obviously.
It's going to be me. That's not even.
Yeah.
It's not even. Look,
the guy who professionally works with music and proactively enjoys dancing, or me? I don't. Is this tough?
this is that's fun. Logan asks, please detail all the ways you and Arif lied on your respective college applications and how it makes you unqualified to be podcasters. If anything, it makes us more qualified, really.
Yeah, I think the more you lie in a college application, the more they want you to. And like, think about it. Wouldn't Zoran Mondani be an outstanding podcaster? Like, come on. That guy's got a ton of charisma. No, but obviously podcasting is what you do when you can't do anything else.
Yeah. I've always said that.
Seems to be able to do something else. I guess we'll see. But yeah, I don't know. I probably lied on my college applications. I can't remember what my lies were, but it was enough to get me into Hamlin, which I didn't go to, but I got in. So.
that still counts. Just imagine
and McAllister told me I would have got in if I had applied like earlier, which is a very strange thing to hear.
You just hadn't honed your liberal chops yet enough to be accepted into McAllister.
No, my essay was like pretty.
Even for left wingers, it was like a bit too out there.
Yeah, they were like, "Hey, man, you gotta leave that in high school."
that level of optimism, you're sitting there just going like, what they should do is they should tear down all those houses on Summit Avenue and just put communal farms in.
And McAllister was like, "Oh yeah, no, for sure we want you. Yeah, no, definitely."
There's a certain line you have to cross for McAllister, and that was it. I say as somebody who never went to McAllister, but still, I lived in the neighborhood for a few months. I feel like I can say these things.
I slept in the McAllister dorms a lot for reasons. I could say that.
I used to hang out on Grand fairly often when I lived in the Merriam Park neighborhood. Let's go to. I didn't tell any lies on my college application. If I'm remembering it correctly, because I was applying quickly to go to a college. I just needed to go.
Yeah, fair enough.
So no, I did not lie on my college application, but it'd be more fun if I did. White Cactus asks, what other podcasts would you recommend, football related or otherwise? You're on like 16 of them, aren't you?
Yeah, well, I'm going to recommend the ones I'm not on because that, not only does that feel appropriate, but I feel like, I want to do right by the mailbag on occasion. Not always. On
occasion, yes.
But on occasion. And here, the Pablo Torre Finds Out podcast is outstanding. Every episode I've listened to is fantastic. The fact that I wrote about something that they did, it put them at the top of my mind. But I do think that they're probably the best sports podcast out there right now because they are really entertaining. Like every 6th or 7th episode is like deep dive investigative journalism. But they had one on, I guess this one technically counts as investigative journalism, but didn't feel like that. But they did one on corruption in fencing that I did not think I would find entertaining at all. Massively, massively entertaining. They just did one on the underworld of bird watching. They do anything, and it's an incredible podcast. So I recommend that. There's probably other podcasts besides that one. So, yeah, I would Google podcasts, and then you'll probably find some.
That's wow. I don't. That is a hell of a response.
Okay, let me go through my podcasts, because I haven't listened to podcasts in a while. Behind the Bastards, I love that one. I don't know if 99% Invisible has produced any new episodes in a while, but I used to like that a lot. They have. And, oh, wow, these episodes look good. I love 99% Invisible. I just haven't listened to podcasts in a while. So that's really good. It's a little overproduced, but once you get past that, it's really good stuff. QAnon Anonymous, I recommend that in part because I was on it. They just spun off 10 different podcasts. So, pay attention to what, that happened yesterday. So pay attention to which one you're downloading, but they have one called Science in Transition, done by, with my friend Liv Agar on it. And she's one of the smartest people I know, and which I feel like I end up knowing a lot of smart people, and so this to me is like a compliment in the highest terms. She's incredibly intelligent, so I would do that. They're very funny. They're extremely funny, so I'd recommend QAA.
Mine are fairly standard. Enjoy The Bugle with Andy Zaltzman and his random group of people that come on and talk about. Sometimes it's U.S. politics, sometimes it's just crazy stuff happening around the world, but it's quite good. The Right Time with Bomani and Jones. That's one that I enjoy. There's this one that's a Viking. It's like a daily Vikings thing. Like I think the phrase is something like it's start off your day right, or you start your day with this podcast. Something about that. I cannot remember the name.
That doesn't sound like it would be good.
I mean, who can talk about the Vikings every day? Tommy Gunn asks, got any wildly...
Wait, I totally forgot. I should recommend some football podcasts.
I mean, sure.
Split Zone Duo for College, the Mina Kimes Show featuring Lenny, and then probably some podcasts that I haven't been a guest on I should probably recommend. Whatever podcast Trevor Sikkema is on now, is it the Stock Exchange, the PFF Stock Exchange? That one's good. The Distraction with the Defector, that one's good. And then non-football, again, Western Kabuki. I like that a lot.
Tommy Gunn asks, Tommy Gunn's bringing us back to like the first couple episodes we ever did of the show. Got any wildly irresponsible prognostications for us?
Is Tommy Gunn like an OG?
Yes.
Have we had him like all 12 years or whatever it's been?
It's 12 years and about 2 weeks. And probably.
My God. Wildly irresponsible prognostications. Justin Jefferson breaks the receiving touchdown record. What is it, like 20? Receiving touchdown record, NFL. What we got? I am not a robot, Google. Come on. You know me.
You
Come
say
on, Google.
You've only got 170 tabs going.
No, that's career. Come on. I don't want career. Well, I can click on it and then change it to season, so I'll just do that. Brought to you by Pro Football Reference.
That.
Single season. Yeah. 23. It's by Randy Moss, 2007. So Justin Jefferson will get 24. What's his record? Like 16?
It's definitely not 23. If I have a wildly irresponsible prognostication, the Giants are going to be better than you expect.
You're a big Jackson Dart guy?
I think the Jackson Dart is going to be very entertaining to watch after he supplants Russell Wilson and it's because it's Russell Wilson and then Jameis Winston as the quarterbacks on that team. Do you think Jameis just gets cut in the preseason and ends up being like a backup in New Orleans again or something?
That would make a lot of sense. I can't think of like 3 more wildly different quarterbacks to have on the same
roster. That quarterback room is wild.
That's crazy.
And they still have Luigi in there. I want to say he's the odd man out, but no, I think that Jameis gets sent out. I think that the Giants win way more games than you would ever expect that group of players to accomplish. It should be entertaining to see. That is absolutely a wild and irresponsible prognostication. Patrick asks, for the Norse Code outdoor cooking corner, I am looking to host the neighbors for a barbecue this summer/fall. I have a large propane grill and medium-sized charcoal grill available. What would you do on the grill to feed approximately 8 adults and 6 kids?
Man, if you had a smoker, this would be like a perfect application for a brisket.
Well, you can still do pulled pork and do it successfully on a charcoal grill. And that is, you're going to run into the stall point more on a charcoal grill than you will on, say, a pellet, but that is absolutely an option.
Yeah.
I would think either pulled pork for that because of the ease of it, and just make sure that you're able to work around any potential stall time, because that thing is going to stall. You could also do tri-tip, which is fun, and I actually just did that for my birthday here a couple weeks ago, and it was really good, really fun. I just treated it like I can't remember what temperature I cooked it up to, but How to Barbecue Right has a video where they do like a barbecue tri-tip, and it's very, very, very good. And it's just different. It's basically just, instead of treating it like a brisket or treating it like something else, you just like treat it like a steak up to a certain temperature. I believe it was like 125, and then you basted it with like barbecue sauce on it, and then got a crust on it. It was really good. I really enjoyed it.
Right.
That's and you're eating steak, and who doesn't like that? Otherwise, just go traditional and go burgers and have fun with it.
Yeah, you got like 6 kids. The burgers are just going to work. I mean, that's the kind of thing I like about the pulled pork, is that you could just pull out the buns and make them sandwiches. The kids will love it. But yeah, I think with the burgers, it's just like, it's safe, it's easy, it's delicious. Hard to hate. Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, for anyone who doesn't know, James has cut out like 20 sneezes of mine, but that one I just kept the sentence going, so we just got to keep that one in.
I'm absolutely leaving that one in. Ingram's in need of a new bit asks, have you ever missed an X as quickly as Kirk Cousins apparently did? Wow. I haven't had a chance to watch the video yet, watch the Netflix series yet, but there's some coping involved in all of this.
Yeah, all of the reporting about Cousins in quarterback has been interesting. Certainly, he's mad at the Falcons, which, sure, I get it. But yeah, have I missed an X as quickly as Kirk Cousins? Buddy. James knows better than I'm willing to share, but like super, yes, the answer is extremely yes. For James, there's no way that's true. How many X's are you even on good terms with?
Less and less every day. Eric the Red asks, can you talk about the birds and the bees? Not like the sex stuff, but like bird and bee varieties, local species, migration patterns, and other habits, fun facts, etc.
All right, so listen to other episodes of Norse Code for the bee stuff, and then listen to the most recent episode of Pablo Torre Finds Out for the bird stuff.
It's pretty impressive being able to just delegate like that. I'm impressed. For Arif's Gaming Corner. This is from Kyle Slaby. For Arif's Gaming Corner, I am now starting to play Umemu Sume Pretty Derby.
You nailed it, James.
Yeah, I'm proud of that pronunciation. I am not allowing myself to purchase anything.
No. Say the full name, James.
What? Umemu Sume Pretty Derby. Pretty Derby. I am not allowing myself to purchase anything with real currency and want to get the most out of it I can with your, I'm sure, hundreds of hours of expertise, Arif, in this exciting anime girl horse racing game. For those who aren't familiar with the franchise, what tips can you give a poor gamer like me?
Okay, so I am in a group chat where people have brought this game up, and it turns out, and they've shared like little clips of them playing, and it turns out that my previous relationship, the person I was in a relationship with a couple of years ago, did try to watch the anime that this game is based on, and they like couldn't do it. And from my understanding, it's a pretty popular anime, and the premise seems to be that like all of the humans that are like the protagonists and stuff are also horses, and you just kind of have to roll with it. They don't like look like horses, but they like race and stuff. And I don't like, if one of them like gets a broken foot, I don't know if they like have to shoot them or something. I don't know how that works, but yeah, I don't know. But I haven't played the game. I've seen like 2 clips in a group chat, and one clip on Twitter. And yeah, they're racing on a horse track. That's for sure happening. And I guess it's what do they call it? A gotcha game, where it's essentially gambling. Like you earn enough points to open a box, and the box has a card, and the card is one of the horses. And like, you can understand the appeal because it's gambling, right? Or like my previous relationship, Horse Expert, right? That was like, oh, it was an anime about horses. Oh, this isn't really what I signed up for. Because, that person knew horse racing. And that does not seem to be the target audience here. And so you can open these little like chests or boxes full of coins and cards, and the cards represent the various horses who are also girls. But also you can buy them, and if you buy them, that's way better for you in terms of the quality of the horse. I don't want to say the word horse girl or girl here because that sounds worse, I think, and I just want to stick with horses.
It's not helping either way.
Okay. What tips can I give? Okay, so you don't want to spend money, like real life money. So my tip here, go to the Google Play Store and purchase something you want. Just stuff you want, like a subscription to Adobe Acrobat or something, right? Maybe a little photo editing thing or a video editing thing, like something that makes sense to pay for. And that'll give you Google Play points. And then you can convert those points into an equivalent of real life currency when you make purchases in the horse game. And so that way you can get the good gambles. You can get the better odds for the gambling portion of the game, which is a lot of the game. Because it's a game about a famous gambling event, horse racing, where then you also have to gamble to even acquire the horse. So I don't know that you can avoid this.
The next question is going to be from Roombol Sharif, who asks, if Norse Code made a beer with a local brewery, which brewery and what would the punny beer name base name be? I think Consensus Board Stout. I think that
good.
works.
I like that.
I think that's a strong name. You were just gonna keep sneezing.
Look, man.
I like, as an editor, I've just given up. I'm done.
I was not sneezing before we started recording. That's the worst part.
You are allergic
and it has been
to doing summer
hellacious.
Episodes.
Yeah.
Summer episodes are killing Arif.
I suspected I would be getting like a runny nose, so I took a Claritin like an hour before, 2 hours before we started recording, and it has not helped in iota.
No, that is absolutely the case. It's quite frankly, it's been funny to watch, and it'll be less fun to edit.
Birds and the Bees, Honey Vice.
There you go. Some child labor cookie flavor. Let's go to also Roombol Sharif also asks, what's the worst list James and Arif are on, and why won't you release it?
So, I mean, I feel like I've told the story, but like I was on a list adjacent to the no-fly list for a little bit, right? Like I've told this on the podcast, haven't I?
I believe so, ?
Yeah, so I found this out while I was on the University of Minnesota debate team. And not every airline apparently subscribed to this list. So it was like when I say it's adjacent to the no-fly list, it is a really significant drop-off in terms of seriousness, right? Like, you're on the no-fly list, every airline, by law, has to pay attention to that. But if you're on the, hey, this guy's kind of shady list, some airlines are just like, well, if he hasn't done anything, which is a surprisingly large number of airlines, if I'm being honest. I expected a lot of them to just be like, shady guy list. Well, let's screw that. But no, every time my debate coach would like book us for flights to like California or Texas or wherever the debate tournament was, we would often fly like the cheapest airlines, so like Frontier, Spirit, Southwest a ton. Um, and some of those cheap airlines, I think Frontier was one of them, would and Southwest would bump my ticket down a bunch of priority steps. And so everybody got to board with group 3 and I would board with group 7, even though all the tickets were bought at the same time and all of us have the same amount of priority points and they were bought with the same credit card and it didn't matter. I was bumped down a bunch of priority groups. And in Southwest at the time, especially, it really mattered because how early you got to board determined what seat you got because you pick your own seat. And they didn't parse out super priority and then those guys would end up sitting in the exit row. If you got early, you could just get the exit row without paying any extra. What a time to be alive. And so I just got really ticked off at one point. And so I just hung out with the rest of the debaters. And then we would start boarding. And then they would scan my ticket. And the guy was like, hey, you have to go back there. And I was like, that feels racist. I didn't say that because, telling someone to go to the back of the line feels, But I did say, hey, every time my last name comes up and the guy got crazy nervous, which was the goal. Every time my last name comes up and he's like, okay, sir, could you step to the side here? And I was like, hey, you got to tell me what's going on because you saw everybody I was talking with. We all bought our tickets at the same time using the same credit card. We're part of a group. And this happens every single time I try to board, that I board the last person on the plane. And you have to understand how humiliating it is to always be the last person to board. And I don't know the reason for that because it's not and I'm saying this as people are getting on the plane. They're hearing this conversation. And I said, it's not like you're any more secure making me board last. It just feels racist, which it did. And I was right about that. But the guy was like, hey, can you not talk about security while people are boarding? And I was like, you started the conversation, whether or not you knew it, right? And so the guy was like, okay, so here's what happens. You got put on a list. And I was like, the list where you're worried about how bad of a guy I might be, so I still get to board the exact same plane, but later? How does that make anything better? And he's like, well, you just have to call the Department of Defense. And I was like, you've got to be effing kidding me. Or it was the Department of Homeland Security, whatever. And I did. And what's really funny is that another debater was coaching a guy with the same name as somebody who actually was on the no-fly list. So he was kind of familiar with this process. So I called the Department of Homeland Security to get shuttled around a bunch of times. I'm like, hey, is there a reason I'm on this list? And they said it was because of an incident in 2007 during the summer. And I know what that was. It was when I went to nationals for extemporaneous speaking. And if you're unfamiliar with that category, the element of the category that's really critical is that you're bringing a ton of current events news articles with you, so that you can reference it when you figure out what the topic of your speech is, because the nature of the event, so you figure out what your speech is 30 minutes before you give the speech, and those speeches are about elements that are important in international or domestic politics. And I qualified in international extent, so I had to talk about the Iraq War or the war on terrorism or North Korea. And so when I flew down to it was Dallas, Texas, right? Because it was at Grapevine. My tubs, because we printed them all out on paper and we put them in these giant tubs. My tubs were ransacked by the TSA. And I think that's what put me on the shady person list. And I don't know why that results in changing the boarding group that I'm on, but it did. And I was like, and, so they didn't tell me that that's what the incident was. But I was like, is there any way to take me off this friggin' list? And they were like, well, can you answer a couple of questions for us? And I was like, yeah, I got time to kill. I'm on the phone with the DHS. And they had to answer a couple of security questions. I had to give them my social security number and affirm that I'm not this other Arif or whatever. And then they asked me some questions about why I would have newspaper articles about North Korea. And instead of like giving the real answer, which is I'm at a speech tournament where I have to know all these things, I was just like, aren't you scared about North Korea? And that worked.
Speaking as somebody who has done foreign extemp before, I'm just enjoying the idea of you being grilled over that.
It's so stupid, like, because it was nationals. Every kid is arriving at the same time, and there's like 30,000 kids. No, that's not inaccurate, but like, there were probably 1,000 kids with tubs full of evidence about the war on terror and about Iran's nuclear weapons program and about North Korea. And like, mine was the one that was ransacked. They took the files. I had to reprint a bunch of research. It was infuriating.
This is what the Patriot Act did to an entire generation of extempers.
Yeah, they radicalized me. Not that I'm a radical. I'm not even Muslim, if we're being 100. But if I were, they did it to me.
There we go. The worst list I'm on. I mean, if you Google my ex-wife's name, sometimes my name comes up, and I really don't like that.
That's not good.
That's very not good,
super
especially
not
with
good.
the news recently. So that is the opposite of something I enjoy. Robert asks a question for the quote, what's more likely, end quote, corner. What's more likely? The Bengals don't manage to extend their lease on the stadium and move to Mexico City to become the MC Hammers? Kirk Cousins is traded midseason and leads the Giants to the playoffs? There we go. Or Aaron Rodgers' wife turns out to be an AI bot called Veronica.
Oh, that last one's really appealing. Okay, MC Hammers is clever, but that is not happening. I just want to say that. But I did want to point out excellent work there. Mm-hmm. Aaron Rodgers' wife turns out to be an AI bot. I love that. I think that one's the truest, especially because it'll be funny when the cost of using LLMs does skyrocket, because my friend Ed Zitron just published a piece over at where'syourEd.at, which is a great name. Where's your ed at? That's perfect. But he just published a piece about how every company offering an LLM to the public, or even enterprise, is losing money because the cost of compute for each paying user is higher than the amount that they are paying. And so they're going to have to ramp up, and they've already begun ramping up prices. So the idea that Aaron Rodgers fell in love with an LLM that he will now have to pay probably 10 to 20 times more for is very funny to me. So that's the true one.
Yeah, that works. That works for me. Finally, the mailman asks, imagine the 2025 Vikings are a toxic British rock band whose brilliance is overshadowed only by their vitriol. Which two teammates' relationship will rocket these Vikings into the stratosphere of possibility, only to see the negative effects of that relationship ruin the team for the next 16 years?
So we got to figure out who our Gallagher brothers are.
Yes.
I love that. It suggests that the 2025 Vikings are so historically good that 40 years from now, people will be like, hey, man, remember that band? Or remember that team? They were really good for that very short period of time. And then one or both of them was an asshole, which it really depends on how you interpret the relationship between the Gallaghers. But I only think it's one of them. But
30 years, but yes.
Yeah. Okay, so which two Vikings? I think they have to be foundational to the team. So it's really difficult for me to pick somebody that's not going to be here for a ton of time. Which I know when we discussed this, when we originally attempted to record, that you mentioned Andrew Van Ginkel, and I like that a lot as one of the two members. I like that a lot, but I don't think he's going to be here a long time because he is a relatively older player. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to go with J.J. McCarthy and Jordan Addison. You'd think Justin Jefferson, but he's just way too chill for that. So I just don't see that. So I think it's J.J. McCarthy.
Addison's pretty low key, though. I mean, he famously just falls asleep. He doesn't seem like the person to cause
Well, I think it's pretty
drama.
up and down, right? Because he also famously goes 140 miles per hour.
Oh, I suppose there's some volatility there. This answer actually might have legs. Originally, I was going with Andrew Van Ginkel and Ivan Pace because I think the defense is going to be where the real fun happens. But no, that I could see that. I think Jordan Addison makes a strong case for the younger of the Gallaghers. Sure. And with that is going to be the end of this episode of Norse Code. Arif gets to blow his nose. We'll be back soon to discuss the opening of training camp and all that, so look out for that. And August 1st, we will begin my favorite time of year, which is signups for the Hell League. The Hell League signups will be open on August 1st. Join us in hell this fall and be the envy of all of your friends when you try to explain the scoring system to them. It is truly amazing. August 1st, we will start the signups, so check that out. We'll be back around the time that training camp opens. Arif, let's plug some stuff.
Go over to Wide Left Football. In addition to the pieces that I explicitly plugged, right, about like the NFLPA and stuff, we've got a bunch of really great pieces from our contributors. So Ben Glassmeyer wrote a great piece on why the NFL needs a minor league and how the UFL might need to change in order to be that solution. James Foster followed up on his rookie receiver piece that was really well received. He went through like 17 rookie receivers and he ranked all of them in a ton of details, like over 6,000 words. And he talks about like the details of route mechanics and stuff like that. Like he goes into a lot of nuance about these receivers. And I asked him like, hey, like you have Keon Coleman ranked dead last and he ranked like 6th or whatever in receiving yards among rookies, and Bills fans, maybe they're not optimistic, but they're certainly not pessimistic about him, knowing that he had an injury. So can you explain that one a little bit more? And so he wrote a piece about Keon Coleman that I think is really, really good and goes into a lot of detail about what might make a receiver succeed and what might make him fail and how some of that is not necessarily his fault. And then in addition to the NFLPA piece, I wrote a piece about just like living in a historic moment. And that was kind of motivated by the beginning of the strikes on Iran and coinciding with these protests, and also the assassination and attempted assassination of a Minnesota politician. So that's called history fatigue. People responded pretty well to that, but that one I do talk about all of the issues that I just discussed. So bunch of different types of stuff over at Wide Left, but I think that listeners of this podcast should enjoy it.
Well, that's going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. We'll be back soon. So for Arif, my name is James. Thank you guys so much for listening. And please remember that the horrors persist, and so do we. And we'll be back soon. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, and wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan of... And he can be found on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL. I'm your producer and host, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN or at my personal account at Big Mono. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can do so in a couple of different ways. You can go to patreon.com/NorseCode and donate there. For $3.50 a month, you get bonus material and more. You can also go to paypal.me/NorseCode for a one-time donation, or you can go to norsecode.threadless.com and pick up some Norse Code merch. Any questions or comments that cannot fit in a tweet can be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, we thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this.
All things are possible through the power of Ben DiNucci.